Tesla FSD beta for Europe. We may just have gotten a first glimmer of hope that we will be able to get it because of a new set of regulations. Let's dive into that. Over the past few weeks, I've learned that the UNECE has started working on the draft of a new set of regulations, which they will call the DCAS, which stands for Dynamic Control Assistance System. Now, this is a little bit different from what we know, because currently we have two different systems. We have the ADAS and the ADS. Now, ADAS stands for Advanced Driver Assistance System, and is basically level 2 as we know it. Now the ADS, which is the automatic driving system, stands for basically level 3 or above, where the car takes complete control. So the automatic lane keeping system, the ALKS, they love to use abbreviations. They are there to basically regulate the way that the car can drive itself. Right, so no supervision needed anymore, and it's fully autonomous up until now for level 3, of course, only in limited conditions. Now, the new set of regulations, the DCAS, is going to be part of an ADAS system, so it's still going to be level 2, and it's still going to require full oversight, but it will allow the car to do more autonomously or semi-autonomously because of the oversight part, of course. And that opens the door for FSD beta, because FSD beta, as we know it in the US, is still a level 2 system. And it requires full oversight by the driver. The driver is always the one in control of the car, not literally, but for the law, it is like this. And it means that you are fully responsible for the behavior of the car. So if FSD beta does an accident, it's your fault, not Tesla's fault. That's the big difference between level 2 and level 3 or level 4, is the responsibility, right? I've explained it a few times already based on the SAE chart where the different levels are. And this new set of regulations is considered to be a level 2 plus. So it's still an ADAS system, but it's going to be allowing a lot more than what the current regulations allow for. So the DCAS is hardware and software collectively capable of assisting a driver. It's only assisting, right? It's not taking over the responsibility of the driver, in controlling the longitudinal and lateral motion of the vehicle on a sustained basis. Now, that does not necessarily mean that you will get rid of the hands-on steering wheel notification. I'll come back to that in a little bit, because it's going to require more control and more control mechanisms than what we currently have. But I'll come back to that in a bit. It still requires the human driver to be permanently engaged and to monitor the environment and the vehicle/system performance. So you as a driver will always remain in control or responsible for the car. So what is currently available and publicly available by the UNECE, it's a draft, and it's the very first draft with a lot of open spaces, a lot of to be determined or to be confirmed or discussion points that are still in there. So it is very high level at the moment, and it mainly talks about the principles of how this DCAS regulation would work and what the purpose would be. Now, one of the things that is in there is that the vehicle or the system needs to be designed in such a way that it is preventing as much as possible the misuse of the system. So it needs to be able to prevent that you get too confident in the system and you start using your smartphone, where this is not allowed on a level 2 basis, even in this new set of regulations, because you need to be aware at all times. A second part, and it is literally mentioned in there, that is autopilot jail. Right now, if you ignore the system a couple of times and it warns you with the beeps a few times, you get sent to autopilot jail and you need to pull over. you can't have autopilot anymore until you stop the car, put it in park, put it in drive again, and then you can basically, you have a new drive that you're doing, and then you can use it again. That specific thing is actually mentioned in this new set of regulations, where the system needs to constantly monitor the driver, and it needs to be able to determine that the driver is not attentive enough. And if it's not attentive, if he or she is not attentive enough repeatedly, then the system should shut down and not allow its further use anymore. So autopilot jail is literally mentioned in the new set of regulations, at least the draft proposal. The third principle they are applying is that the manufacturer needs to encourage the driver to know what the system can and cannot do. And I really like this one, because there are too many assumptions on what it can do or what it can't do. And the naming is one of them. I will come back to that later as well, because there are specifics around that as well in the new regulations, or at least in the proposal. But yeah, RTFM is definitely part of what these regulations encourage people to do. And I agree, people should know what they buy into. And if you spend $10,000 or euros on something that is called autopilot or something that is called full self-drive, you should be investigating into what you're actually buying. But of course, that is my personal opinion on that. And I'm, for one of those guys that actually reads the manual on a regular basis to see if anything has changed. It's always a good thing to know what your 2-ton dead machine can and cannot do. Now, I briefly mentioned the naming, and it is indeed, for some people, it's a big deal that something is called full self-drive when it's not full self-drive. It's full by yourself driving, as my friends from Talking Tesla like to name it. And they're right. It's just a name. It's the same with autopilot. It's just a name. You are still in control. You are still responsible. So you need to know that and not assume anything about the naming. That is fully automatic driving. Tesla also never said that anywhere, that the FSD package that they are offering now, that it is full self-driving. So if you read into what you're actually buying, you know exactly what you're getting. And the name, well, is just a name. However, apparently enough people are against the use of those terms. And now within the regulation, there's, I think it's Norway, that is proposing to put a ban on marketing of this specific functionality around this regulation. So everything that falls within the DCAS regulations should not be named anything that has automatic, self-driving, pilot, that kind of stuff. So Nissan's ProPilot cannot be used. Autopilot cannot be used. FSD Beta cannot be used. What should they call it at that point? Right? It is semi-autonomous driving, but hey, we can't call it autonomous because that word is banned at that point. So it's still not approved. I think it's rather silly to do that. I understand why at a certain point or up to a certain extent, but it's going to be difficult to market those different functionalities under this regulation if you cannot use any of those terms. Now, at the beginning, I also mentioned briefly something about the driver monitoring. So we won't be getting rid of, because it's an extended period that it needs to be able to sustain itself. We're not getting rid of the hands-on steering wheel. Actually, we're going to require two criteria that will have to be monitored. So for example, your input on the steering wheel and the gaze in the right direction. That's why we have the interior camera, and I believe it won't be able to be rolled out without an interior camera. But once that is done, then it only needs to detect another input every 30 seconds. So that's in the proposal. So we go back from 15 seconds to 30 seconds. That would already be a big improvement. However, if your gaze is detected to be to the side because you're looking at a plane landing or a nice tree or whatever, then if it detects that your gaze is not in the direction of traffic for more than 3 seconds, you will get a warning as well. And that's really a very short period. Now, I do understand that if you have to pay attention at all times, right, then 3 seconds looking away while driving, you could cover a big distance at highway speeds. So the risk of hitting something is definitely bigger at higher speeds, of course. So in 3 seconds, you cover a large distance. That's why they have this regulation and this proposal, at least. But yeah, the system is already, the way we have it right now in the Tesla, is already quite good, especially on the highway. A 3 second gaze to the side does not mean that you don't watch the traffic in front of you. You could start looking slightly to the side towards something that's happening there, or towards another car. It's all going to depend on how wide the angle is allowed to be when they say, okay, your gaze is not in the direction of where it should be, right? Can you still look to the side to other cars, or does it actually mean 90 degrees at least? Now, when we talk about automatic driving or a higher level as what Autopilot can currently do, then of course we immediately come to the unconfirmed lane change. And this regulation leaves it open. It allows for the possibility to do an unconfirmed lane change, but not really. So they will allow the car to initiate the lane change, initiate the blinker, but then they say, well, we need an interaction from the driver to allow it. And it can be a steering input, but it could also be the driver gazing towards the side view mirror to check for oncoming traffic, for example. But it still allows the car to initiate it and then execute the movement on its own, where now, currently, we have to initiate it as a driver by activating the blinker. So now the car can do the activation. Is it better? I don't know. We still need some driver input. And of course, if you're fully attentive, it should not be that big of a deal. But it's going to allow for a much smoother lane change if the car can determine, hey, this is a gap I can get into, instead of the driver having to indicate and then do it. Now, when talking about that lane change, there is one important thing that is added to this regulation or to this set of regulations, and that is that it talks about a minimum amount of time that the blinker should be on before it moves to another lane. It does not talk at the moment about a maximum amount of time. So right now, the way it works is when you activate the blinker for the first second, it cannot do anything. And it needs to stay and it cannot move. And then after 1 second, it can start moving, but it cannot cross the line before 3 seconds and no later than 5 seconds. So you have a 2 second window to actually cross the line. And yeah, in a lot of cases, that is of course not enough time. So that will improve, I guess, unless they add it afterwards. As I said, it's just a draft with a lot of gaps and a lot of to be determineds in there. But if they can leave that open, then you can really indicate like, hey, I want to move in. And then the car behind you will leave some space and allows you to move in. If the space gets big enough, of course. That's the big question, how they will regulate that part. Now, this draft also specifically mentions different kind of maneuvers that are allowed to be done here. And it's following a trajectory when there is no dedicated lane. So that is, for example, when you are at an intersection and you want to do a left turn or a right turn, there is no lane marking there and you need to transition from one lane to the other. That will be allowed in this regulation. So again, that's a bonus point or a good point for allowing FSD beta. The next one is interaction with other road users while following a dedicated lane. This is kind of geared towards roundabouts. So you are on a roundabout, you want to exit the roundabout, then you need to interact with oncoming traffic like a cyclist that is coming from behind you, or what needs to happen if another car is entering the roundabout, that kind of stuff, the rules of right of way, right? So those will fall under that as well. It allows the vehicle to leave its lane of travel when the maneuver is not a lane change. So this could be to drive around a parked vehicle, which is now impossible in Europe. So if you have a car parked and it's in your lane and you just, like a double parked car, for example, or it's a little bit in the lane, then you need to be able to drive around it. And this new set of regulations will actually allow for that. So that's, again, a good point, which we need for FSD beta. And then we have the transitioning between lanes with different directions. So it even allows for execution of a U-turn. Now this seems like a very dangerous one to immediately include. We need it if we want to move to full self-driving, of course. But this one would be rather low on my list to actually include in the set of a level 2 regulation. But it's good that they put it in there. Let's hope that they find a way to actually make it workable. And then, of course, there is a vehicle departing and arriving at a parked position. The driver needs to be in control at all times. So either, again, you need to be very close to the car so you can monitor it, or you need to be in the car and it's just like the reverse of an auto park. Right? You auto park into a spot and then you can exit it for people that don't have good judgment in distance and I don't know. But that's what it sounds like at the moment, and I don't have any additional information on what exactly that is meant to be. And then it can actually use lane changes in itself. So the previous set was you're leaving the lane, but you're not executing a lane change. You just want to drive around an obstacle. Here we are talking about actual lane changes with a purpose. Like, for example, forming an access corridor for emergency vehicles. That is what we really need, because in a lot of countries in Europe, this is now mandatory to create that virtual rescue lane, which I made a video about some time ago. It allows for driving around a stationary obstacle. That could be, for example, with roadworks, that there is like an obstacle in the road and then you need to drive around it, or you change lanes because of roadworks, that you actually have to move over a complete lane instead of just driving around an obstacle. It allows you for passing slower moving vehicles, so that would be like the auto lane change or the unconfirmed lane change on highways. It will allow you also on local roads to pass by specific slower driving vehicles. So that's a good one. We also need that for FSD beta. And then, of course, maneuvers that are necessary to follow the navigation system. And that means that if you are approaching an intersection, need to drive to the left, you need to pre-sort in the correct lane, and those lane changes will also be allowed. Again, really necessary for FSD beta. And the last one is for dynamic road signs, like cops, even that is being mentioned, roadworks, dynamic signs that say, okay, this road is closed or this lane is closed, for example. So those kinds of indications that you need to change lanes, those will have to be read by the car as well, and the car can react to those. This is the information that I was able to find in the past couple of weeks. As I said before, it's very scarce and it's very flu at the moment. It's still a first draft with a lot of gaps in there that need to be filled out. So I don't expect this regulation to be in effect anytime soon. Basically, not this year. But who knows? Maybe they finally kick it into gear and they move on with the next set of regulations. One can only hope, of course. But what we are talking about is level 2+, which means it's still ADAS, Advanced Driver Assistance System. It's an assistance system. It will only allow the car for more actions, and the driver will always be responsible for the car under these regulations. Now, in the meantime, the unconfirmed lane change is still up for voting in the June session. So once I have information about that, I will report on that as well as the level 3 up to 130 kilometers an hour. And if they can pull that off, then Mercedes really will have an advantage over Tesla at that point in Germany, where it can already do it up to 60 kilometers an hour right now as a traffic jam assistant. If they allow it up to 130 kilometers an hour, then basically you can do hands-off driving for hundreds of kilometers on the German Autobahn and start typing emails, checking your phone, that kind of stuff. Not reading your newspaper because of the driver monitoring. And you need to be able to take over in a reasonable time and still have some awareness of your surroundings, of course. But holding your phone, working on a laptop, that would be allowed up to 130 kilometers an hour. That would be a very big step forward in the regulation and in the path towards full self-driving. So are we going to get FSD beta in Europe? Maybe. This will definitely open the door, but as I said, it's only a draft, it will take some time, and personally, I don't expect it to be in effect anytime this year. So there you have it. I hope you found this useful, and as always, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and make sure you click that little bell icon so you don't miss out on any new videos. And for now, thanks for watching. See you guys in the next one. Bye bye.